So we're here to talk about children's film, and I have some very provocative numbers that have been provided me as to how many we make of these in Canada. They're not startling, although they may be startling for what we don't do. According to the Canadian Media Production Association, it states that theatrical production of children's films in Canada was only 4% of the total volume of children's and youth production. The big bulk of that is for TV in Canada, but that took a hit last year. It went down from 397 million to 309 million. And to give you an even greater idea about this, there's only one Canadian feature film at Tiff Kids this year. I wanted to begin by asking a provocative question, and I spoke with Xiaoshuan last week by telephone, and the question I want to ask all of you is, why should we be making Canadian children's films? Like, what's the unique reason why we should do that? Xiaoshuan, do you want to start? You had a good answer.
Okay, if I remember. Well, I grew up in communist China and got access to very limited movies when I was young. And but I don't think it's that kind of unique experience that when you grow up, one of the most unforgettable memories was sitting in either outdoor cinema or inside cinema watching a movie that amused you, entertained you, educated you, and left you a mark for the rest of your life. And I think that's very much shared by many other people around the world. And that's why it's very important to make a movie for the children's audience. And also, I truly believe that we're all monsters of habits. And whatever you're used to may stay with you for the rest of your life. If you're used to Coca-Cola, you may keep it. And if you're used to Tim Horton, Canadian Tire, that could stay with you as well. If we don't make an effort to provide such content to Canadian kids, they will grow up with Pixar and they will stay there. That's my answer.
I can tell by Michael's style he's a very playful nature. Why do you think we should have Canadian films, Michael?
Well,
Canadian children's films.
I think that that was a terrific answer that Sean gave us. Xiao. Okay. What I would add to it that's kind of interesting is that in Canada, we built a tremendous reputation over the last 30 years, 40 years for television, children's television. We've been successful around the world. We've been leading suppliers. And that particular business, as we heard, is under pressure. At the same time, what's interesting and exciting is that the children's and family feature area, particularly what they call the 4-quadrant picture, which refers to movies like Cars or Shrek or, movies that appeal to the whole family, has grown tremendously. And whereas 30 years ago, when Rock and I were starting off making our movies for kids, there really wasn't huge numbers earned by, kids' pictures. Today, the biggest box office earners are kids' pictures. So it's kind of ironic that we've abandoned as a country the segment that's actually the most successful and the most exciting on a global basis at a time where it's really grown. So I think it's about time that we start producing more films for kids and the family. And I broaden it to that because you really need to reach that whole family audience to get to be able to justify the economics of making a movie and releasing a movie. And it's by focusing on that and telling, our stories, because that's what we do when we make movies, that we actually help to build, the next great Canadian industry, which could be and should be, I think, producing, big movies for kids and family. We've shown that we can do it in other areas. We've shown that we can make those movies on a smaller level, but now it's time to step up and turn up the heat.
John, can you give us a perspective from the funding point of view? Like, are you seeing applications for these kind of movies, or people? What do you think it's all about?
Yeah, we don't actually see that many applications for screenplay development for kids' films. My sense is, kind of a self-selection from producers because they know that they're tough films to finance and tough films to get theatrical distribution, certainly in Canada for. so I would say, as I said, for a while, we had a fund that was specifically aimed at family features, and we couldn't actually spend the money because there weren't enough people coming in with proposals. So we went to TV, and we started actually to do fairly well with some of the series. And I'll throw one more kind of wrinkle out there as I look through the Tiff Kids brochure. There's a fair number of also feature docs for kids in the festival, which is of course something else that Canada does very well, but something that's now under pressure as well, right? And as I look through, I've seen the Ballymun Lullaby, which is one of the Irish films that's here, and it's just a documentary about kids' lives, and I think that's an equally important thing for Canadian kids to experience and see kids' lives from around the world and around the country kind of portrayed in documentary as well.
Rock, why do you think we should have Canadian children films?
Because that segment, the audience, is the most important. As it was said, a film that has impressed us when we were 9, 10, 11, 12 will stay with us for all our life. And if at that age we don't have the opportunity to see films that would impress us, we are lost in a certain way when comes time to go to movie by ourselves and watch movies at 15 or 20 or 30 or 50 years old. I think that each country should devote a part of its resources. Doesn't work.
Should devote a part of his fund to producing that type of films. And as Michael said, it can be rewarding economically speaking, because 3 of my films have gotten the golden reel, which means that the year this film have been released theatrically here in Canada, they are the one who did the best at the box office.
Can you say which ones?
The Dog Stopped the War, Tadpole and the Whale, and Back and Broccoli. And those films, among all the films produced in a country, I'm not referring to USA, of course, generally speaking, are the one that travels the best all over the world. Of the films that I have produced, about 3/4 of them have been sold in over 100 countries. We have access today of those films in French, in English, in Chinese, in Spanish, in Italian, in German, and or subtitle in Scandinavia, because Scandinavia exceptionally prefer to show a film subtitled than dub, but even for children. But but generally speaking, they are dub and they travel, and they have a long life. Today, the films that I have produced in 1984, 85, 90, 95 are still selling, both at home and over the world. They won't make box office like 10, 15 million in Canada, like some film might from time to time do, but still on the longer life, commercially speaking, it's also very rewarding. So it's rewarding at many levels. Culturally speaking, it is essential. And also commercially speaking, if you are patient enough, it will also be very rewarding there.
I thought I'd just ask Bernie, from your perspective, why should a country make children's films?
I was always surprised, being a television producer, that there was no Dutch cinema for children. There was years ago, but it stopped. And there was a very interesting Swedish cinema, and there was a very powerful American cinema. So I thought, well, what happened in China and what happened in Sweden? And in Sweden, there is Astrid Lindgren, and they made a lot of pictures from her books. And there started a nice series of pictures. So I thought, we have an Astrid Lindgren ourselves in Holland. Her name is Annie M.G. Schmid. She got an Anderson Prize once, and no book of her was filmed. So I decided to buy all the rights and to make all the films from her books. And I decided to do this in 1992, and it took me 6 years to finance the first film. It costed 9 million gulden. It's 4.5 million euro or Canadian dollars. And everybody said, and well, you're crazy. It's impossible to beat the Americans because Disney was so powerful. And I said, we are going to beat them. And but the first thing you need is a big marketing, a good film, big marketing, and a good distributor. So I went to Warner Bros. And I said, I need a distributor. I wanted 100 copies, and that's a lot in Holland because there are only 500 screens. So, and I wanted a MG from 1 million. And they say, you're crazy. Then I said, okay, I'm going to Disney. And I went to Disney, and then at Warner changed something, and Disney was a little bit late. And they called me and said, well, come along. We're going to do it. And then we brought Abel, the Flying Lift Boy, and we beat it that year. Not only Disney, but also DreamWorks. So it was a good year. And it was the start of a very big success for Dutch children films still now.
Are there obstacles that producers face? Like, is there something that's preventing these family films from getting off the ground in Canada? And are there untold stories that are dying to be told that you all know of?
Sure, I'll give from the point of view of an English language producer, because I think there is a difference in the marketplace between Quebec and French speaking producers in Canada and English. From the English point of view, we have the same problem, and it's actually a greater problem in movies than it is in television. In television, we have the CRTC rules that require broadcasters to run a certain percentage of Canadian content on their channels, and therefore Canadian shows have have shelf space. They have a marketplace on TV. When it comes to movie theaters, that same principle doesn't really work, because you can't mandate that people will leave their homes, go to the theater, park their cars, spend money, and go to see a movie just because it's Canadian. You can't bankrupt the theater companies if they aren't going to see those movies. So you can't really dictate that a certain percentage of the movie theaters have to play Canadian movies, and the English Canadian movies have to compete in our marketplace directly with the Americans. That doesn't mean that in Quebec they're not, French language movies aren't competing with the American movies, but they do have, a distinct language benefit and culture and a marketplace that supports product, that's made for them, or programming that's made for them. In English Canada, we have to compete with big box office spends or big marketing spends that are spent where the advertising comes across the border. And so if you're producing an English Canadian feature film, it's got to compete with Shrek, or it's got to compete with Cars, or it's got to compete with, whatever the big latest movie is.
The Lorax.
The Lorax, And so what an English Canadian theatrical distribution company, or any theatrical distribution company looking at English Canada, would say is you've got to try to, if you're going to compete with those movies, you really need to get a U.S. distribution deal so that some of that, marketing money is being spent and will spill across the border. Otherwise, it's it's a very, very difficult exercise to achieve. So I'd say that the marketing spend, the competitive environment are clear issues. And I think what you have to do if you're going to produce those movies is you have to figure out how you're going to make a bigger budget picture that can command a North American release and be a compelling offering that's competitive. So that's the challenge that we face. Otherwise, what we're faced with is producing smaller movies that are really released theatrically in a small way just to have a theatrical release. And because of the nature of, the competitive model, those movies will typically underperform and disappoint, and then therefore you're not going to succeed. And I think that's one of the reasons when I look back at my days at Nelvana, why we got out of producing theatrical movies, having done 8 of them. We just saw that it was harder and harder to compete against the marketing spend because everybody wants to go into the marketplace at the same time with a kid's picture. Essentially, you want to go out in a holiday time when kids are available. And so there's always a big competitive movie that's being released against you. And therefore, the circumstances make it more likely that you're not going to succeed. So doing small movies, I think, is very difficult in this marketplace unless you're looking at that small release. So now, for our first cookie jar theatrical picture, we're developing a movie that we believe can be produced that could compete on a North America-wide basis, attract an audience. It has a built-in audience here. It has an audience waiting for it in America, and that's what we're focused on.
Does it have vampires or zombies in it?
No, but it has a dragon.
I'm just wondering. This is not a situation where the expression "a rising tide lifts all boats." I mean, the Lorax, I think, is the #2 movie this year, and just right behind Hunger Games, which is, you could argue, it's a children's film. People don't go see the Lorax and then say, "I'm going to go see that Canadian film next week." No.
No, but what's interesting is there is the benefit of that you described of the rising tide lifting all boats, in the sense that before animated movies or children's movies were succeeding, theatrical distributors in Canada and many places really weren't that interested in them. So it was very hard to actually get those theatrical releases. Often the theatrical release in the 80s and the 90s was to create a video market for the monetization of, the investment. Today, we're seeing video as a shrinking situation, but the box office can be enormous for these movies. They are the top grossing pictures of the day. And so the problem is that while it creates a marketplace for these movies, and I don't think that marketplace is for Canadian titles versus American titles versus, other titles. I think it's just movies that will get the right release, that will have the right elements that appeal to, the movie-going public. But I think that the issue for us is that the dollars that are being thrown into that marketplace to drive the audience are huge. So a movie like The Lorax probably had a $50 million minimum marketing budget. And in Canada, you're not going to get $50 million to make your movie typically, and you're not going to get you're rarely going to get a $5 million marketing budget for that movie when you think of just even the Canadian ratio against the US. So it just makes it more challenging. We're, on the English-Canadian side, and I repeat that it's on the English side I'm describing it, we are competing with the American marketplace, and we are part of that marketplace. And so that's what we have to focus on, is basically the same way we did in TV, delivering shows that are the ratings winners. We have to do the same thing in movies. Deliver movies that, the audience wants to see and that studios want to release.
Rock, is in Quebec, will people loyally go and see a French children's film?
As Michael said, the French-speaking Canada and English-speaking Canada are two different continents. It's very, very different. And just to illustrate that, when I developed the concept of my Tales for All, one of the elements that I told myself was, I'm French-Canadian, so my first film will be shot in French. I am Canadian. My second film will be shot in English. I am a citizen of the world. My third film will be shot in another language, another country, and it was Poland. And I kept going like that, shooting in French, shooting in English, shooting in Romanian, in Chinese, in other language. At my sixth films was titled Tommy Tricker and the Stand Traveler. That one was shot in English. And I was very proud of it. So I decided with my distributor to release it in Canada in 75 prints, 25 in French, dubbed in French in Quebec, and 50 in English Canada. And we went to have premiere of the film in Vancouver, in Calgary, in Toronto, in Edmonton, all over the place. And while the 50 prints in English theater did $75,000 at the box office, the 25 print in French in Quebec during the same period did $750,000 at the box office. That illustrates the difference completely. And there was even a film critic in Calgary who wrote, the dubbing of Tommy Tricker is so bad, don't worry to go see it. It was shot in English by an English director, written in English, everything. So in those type of films, there is, in the title role, no well-known actor, because most of the time it's kids of 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. And on top of that, at the box office, kids pay half the price. So it's one of the difficulty. It makes it very, very difficult to make it. It's really a marvel when you succeed, but it's a difficulty, and much stronger, as Michael described it, in the English part of Canada, which has to compete directly with American films.
You don't pay attention to film critics, do you, Rock? It's not a healthy thing to do.
I have been lucky. I've been lucky. Most of the time, I've been very well supported by the critics here and abroad. And that same Tommy Tricker, of all my films in France, was the best, the one who did the best at the box office. But can you imagine that with a film for other genres? My first film, The Dog Stopped the War, shot in French, was released theatrically in the States by the Weinstein brothers. And there was other case like that. My worst experience on that side was with Tadpole and the Whale. Again, I was so proud of that film that as soon as I got my first print out of the lab, I took it and fly to LA to show it to Disney, because I was convinced that Disney would like that film and would agree to work with it. So my contact there say, okay, we'll screen it. I will bring some 20 people working with me. And at the end of the screening, he came to me and said, could that film have been shot in French? Because I only see French-speaking names. He hadn't realized that the film was dubbed. Because today we can dub nearly perfectly. So he said, we are going to take it. It is so good, etc. We discussed the release of the film. He was going to open it in 3,000 theaters, spend a budget of such money. So we planned everything, and he prepared the agreement, sent it to me to check if everything was okay, sign it, return it, and then he had to sign, to bring the bus to sign the agreement. And the boss looked at it and said, guys, Disney will never release a dub film. That was it. That was it.
Thank you, Rock. Let's talk about funding. What are and let's ask Bernie. How does funding in Netherlands? I guess you can't really compare to Canada, or maybe you can. And maybe Shashwan could tell us about funding for these kind of films. Can give us an idea of what some of the problems you face, how it works, and whether do children's films work better in the Netherlands, as far as you know, than they do maybe here?
Well, what I heard, yes, but it's quite difficult to fund a film in Holland because we are a very small country with 14 million, maybe 15 million inhabitants at this moment. There's a film fund, you can use it. This fund has almost 30 million euro, and it's not only for children, it's for all the films there are. In Holland there are other funds. There is a co-production fund, but if you want to use this fund, you have to have a broadcaster. So when you are going to finance a film, first you go to a broadcaster, because that's the one you need, and he pays you 100,000 euro. That's a lot for a film. That's very low. But then you can go to this other fund and you can get 500,000 euro. Then you can go to the film fund. You can get 5, 6, maybe 700,000 euro. Then you have 1.1 million, you could say almost, or 1.2. And that's what you regularly can find. If you want to make a real movie, you have to get a good distributor who wants to give you 500,000 or 700,000 euro MG. Then you have to find another country, Belgium, for instance, or Germany, just to support you. Then you can go to Eurimage and you can find some money over there. And at least when you are lucky, We just produced a film called No No the Zigzag Kid. We had a budget of 4.5 million, and it took us more than 5 years to find it. So you have to be very patient, and then you have to be you can hope that the film will be a success. But the last years, the Dutch children and family films are quite successful, and we all have to compete with the same types from America with their marketing power. And for instance, we were with the film in this competition. Here is Elfie the Little Werewolf. We were in the Christmas period in Holland and against Alvin and the Chipmunks 325. The Puss in Boots, Tintin, 5 American films, and we got 300,000 visitors in our country for this film, and Puss in Boots got 600,000, for instance, and Alvin got also 600,000. So we didn't do very bad, but it's difficult.
Let's talk about types of stories. Like what makes a great, let's say Canadian children's film, but maybe any kind of children's film. And Shashwan, do you have any ideas on that? I bet you do. What makes a good film, a good Canadian children's film? Are there stories that need to be told? Are there books that need to be adapted?
It's a tough question. What makes a good children's film, first of all, and what makes a good Canadian children's film that Canadian children like to watch on the big screen? I think in general, what makes a good children's film is something, to me, it should have a certain quality, not talk down, but talk to kids and find the subjects of interest that they would share together with their family and with their peers. And Bernie has been very successful in Holland, and he's really the #1 family film producer for over a decade. And I've been fortunate enough to sell his movies for already 14 years around the world. And one of the examples was last Christmas, his film made 10 years ago called a Catwoman film called Minos was opened in some cinemas in New York and Chicago and maybe some other American cities 10 years after the first theatrical in Holland by Warner Brothers. And that's the strength of a well-made classic family movie that Americans can be late, but occasionally there are some smart guys who wake up and they miss the chance. But he was struggling with adopt a film for 10 years, and finally he decided that the film is worth it. And now with VOD market, and he think he can pay off his P&A eventually with the revenue from VOD. So I think books are a very good source of inspiration for good children's films. And I think compared with teenagers or some other adult groups, children have access to books either online or physically. They are read to or they read books. And that's a very big crowd. Bernie and a lot of other producers are very good at that. And I think we have great writers in Canada who also write good children's books. And I think it's something that we should work on to try to find some stories that are Canadian but also universal and turn it into the big screen.
Thanks. I think Rock wanted to say something, and then Michael.
Yes, for me, a children's film is a film. There is only one difference that makes a children's film for me. Kids are as intelligent as adults. They have the same sensibility as adults. They have and they are even more often than adults want to experiment to discover things. The only big difference is they have 12 years of experience of life. So for me, a good children's film is a story told from the point of view of somebody who has 11, 12, 13 years of experience of life. Because the same story, you can tell it from the perspective, the point of view of somebody who has 40 years of experience of life, or 50. You have the same, it's the point of view. For me, that is the essential. And for me to, because I wanted to make it more difficult, I have decided not to adapt books. I wanted original stories. In book, you have a story, kids have access to those stories, but I want to give something new that they cannot read before having seen the film. So all my films are original stories. I know that commercially speaking, it would have been wiser from time to time to go to book adaptation, and I'm not against it at all. It's just that I have decided to bring forward original stories because I'm Canadian. There is, and my crew most of the time, even if I am in co-production, they will have something Canadian in it. And if these films, as we say, will be seen by kids and adults in Russia, in China, in Italy, it will bring something special, authentic, if the films are true to life and true to human beings, that you cannot have otherwise.
You like setting impossible tasks for yourself, don't you?
Yes.
Michael, you want to weigh in there?
Sure. And I've taken the easier path generally of adapting classic children's stories. And that's where I've had my biggest success. We've done some original ones in the past that were less successful. But in the past I did a Babar movie and a Pippi Longstocking movie, just to name a couple. And they were able to travel around the world and enjoy some success. In the case of what we're doing now, we're adapting what is probably the best-selling Canadian, single Canadian title, which is Robert Munch's The Paperback Princess, and Patricia Rosma will be the writer and director and is working on a script right now. And it'll be a live-action movie with the dragon being animated. And what we're riding on, and the reason we've had support for this, and got a lot of support for it, is because it is such a popular title and it's known, well throughout the world, but primarily in Canada and the U.S. as one of the top children's books. And it's got a compelling, female lead who is unlike any that's been in movie before. And what it gives us is an opportunity to build off of the audience that knows the books. It becomes, from a marketing point of view, it becomes easier to launch the movie, support the movie with ads. And so I'm motivated by two things. One is to bring, great books that I love to life, but the other is to then be able to build off of the existing brand and make my job easier. So a lot of respect for Rock, who takes the harder path.
I'm supposed to ask important questions here, but I can't stop myself. I have to ask this. When you mentioned Robert Munch, everybody's read Love You Forever. That's one of his books, right? That's the book that no parent can read without crying. I don't know if any parent here will agree with that. And could that ever be like that kind of book? I've heard that Goodnight Moon, someone's making a movie out of that, and that's even shorter than Love You Forever. But those kind of children's, like nursery books, could they be features?
Sure. There's, I think, Paperback Princess is 8 pages. I brought it along just to sort of wave it. This is how small a book it is.
Wow.
Anyway, for sure you can take anything and turn it into a movie if there's, something at the essence of it that people want to see and that you can bring to life and create excitement. And to some degree, what you're doing is you're riding, from a marketing point of view, you're riding on a brand that, there's a pent-up demand for.
So like Alligator Pie could be like a Dr. Seuss kind of story?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of those Seuss books are also, in a sense, pretty small.
Exactly, yeah.
To be turned into major movies. But they've been fairly successful, and the Lorax really broke through beyond any of the others.
John, do you want to toss in a thought there?
Yeah, I was just, if some of the people in the audience are aspiring screenwriters or newer producers, I mean, obtaining the rights to literary property certainly is a great way to go, but might be beyond their means. So they'll be taking Rock's route of kind of trying to think up of original content. And I would certainly say exactly what Rock said about is just a movie from a child's perspective. And I've been going to this festival because I have kids for a long time, And that's what I like in the Scandinavian and European live action movies for kids. And I'll reference one that's at this festival this year that I saw. I think it's a Dutch film called Stay is the English translation. And, this is about a young girl whose best friend in the world, his family is from Iran and is facing deportation. And so they run away, like, kids do, and they kind of have an adventure as they're trying to bring awareness to the fact that this family is about to be deported and that the father of the family will face some issues back in Iran. And I was thinking, like, wow, I'd love to see, this is about real issues in that culture in our society as well. And, I'd love to see people write to kids like that from our country.
I heard that it took Walt Disney something like 20 years to convince the writer of Mary Poppins to allow him to make a movie out of it. And even then, she wasn't happy. I don't think she liked the result that happened. Do you have similar kind of stories in Canada, that sort of thing happening? Are there stories that have just been waiting to be told that you can't get? Michael?
Well, just the quick one on Paper Bag Princess is that we obtained most of the rights we have to the book when we bought Cinar back 8 years ago, but we didn't have the movie rights, or we had the movie rights, but we didn't have the merchandising rights, and we didn't have live action rights. And Robert Munch really wanted a live action movie rather than an animated movie, and we wanted to make an animated movie. So we spent about 4 or 5 years wrestling with him over whether it would work in live action, and he finally convinced us, and that's what allowed this whole thing to go ahead. Was really, he had a very strong point of view about what he wanted to see as compared to just, have us do an animated movie we wanted to do. My experience in the past is that generally authors or their estates really want to see, their books turned into TV shows and movies because it creates a broader audience for them. Usually they're not, sort of fighting you over their particular way that they want to do it. But he had a very strong point of view that we had to acquiesce to, and we did.
What about the various funders, the roles they have to play, like the broadcasters as well, and also I'm not as involved in this as you folks are, but I mean I always think about the cabinet ministers, like the culture ministers, the provincial and federal level. Do you have a lot of persuading to do? Like, do they need to be convinced that these kind of films are worth having?
I know a lot from the Canadian point of view, a lot of broadcasters might buy as acquisitions, but rarely kind of, develop and buy as a pre-sale. And I think in feature films in general, people have been trying to get the CBC to be more active, but I think with recent cuts, that'll be even more challenged. I know, the European model it basically starts with the broadcaster, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So CBC would be great.
And Paper Bag Princess actually started with the CBC because for a moment they had a family feature film program that this was part of, and so they provided the initial funding for the script. And then that program has died, so this has gone into telefilm for the regular sort of feature film funding. And that was a program they cut before these recent cuts when they knew they were going to be cut anyway. I mean, for sure there's a tremendous job we all have to do in terms of supporting the spending on, film, television, and culture, with our governments so that they appreciate the fact that it's a good investment.
Bernie?
Yes, about stories and original films. In Holland, we don't have very good storytellers who, the best stories are in books in Holland. But we also try to develop, of course, independent stories, how do you call it, original stories. And the first thing we try to do, and that's why we use those books, is to create an audience. We create an audience who go and they believe again in Dutch films. And it worked, and then we, incidentally, we created an original, of a film based on an original story. For instance, Winky's Horse is based on an original story. And we were successful with it too. On the other hand, we found out that when you are working on the niche market for the Americans, you don't have to beat them because they are not there. So we develop films for young children, preschool, and we are quite successful with preschool children films. So we create a preschool audience already, and after a few years they can go to the next film from us. So we try to be clever. And our biggest problem is, of course, the marketing in our small country. And that's why we have to be more clever than, or more inventive than the Americans. And they have the money and we have the ideas, I think.
Can you give us an example of how, like, of a clever marketing campaign maybe that you've had there?
Well, for instance, the first film we did was based on a book, but the book was not very popular, but the writer was very popular. So we made the marketing on the name of the writer. So the first Annie M.G. Schmid film ever. And she was 80 years old, and she was very famous in Holland, and all the three generations had read her books. So it was the first Annie, first Annie, first Annie. That's what we did. And we got joint promotion from the Dutch Automobile Club. They have a magazine with 3 million copies a month. And we gave them a special, their people could visit premieres free when they called 1 hour, and they had 12 premieres, and we got 8 pages in their magazine and then the cover. And so we did with the telephone company in Holland, and we get them special things. So we didn't have money, but it was with closed gesloten beurzen, closed. Well, not money, but special things.
You mentioned earlier on The Adventures of Tintin, the Steven Spielberg movie, which is based on a European Belgian story, right? And that raises the question: like, do children's films travel? Like, or if you make a Canadian one or one of the Netherlands, can they be universal? Or is that something you should strive to do?
Well, you have a lot of examples. For instance, the Pippi Longstocking thing. And when you have a good story and you have a good character, it can travel around the world. And you need, or the Babar thing, or others. When you have a good character, you can create a good story around the character. And so what we are trying to do now, we think we can't reach the United States because they have ideas we don't have. We try to reach Europe or European ideas countries, and we develop European stories now, and we hope to be successful in the next 3 years.
Yes, for sure.
Because we have been selling independently made children's movies around the world for so long, I could say, and I have also participated at a number of sessions and panels held in Europe on children's movies, the selling, the distribution, the theatrical, and I've got statistics to prove that children's movies actually travel much better than adult movies originated from Europe. I've got box office, I've got admissions to prove that they travel to more countries and they sell more tickets in total, and they sell more DVDs in total, accumulatively. So if you compare just children's movies against other types of movies, either commercially made for adults or art house movies, in general, in Europe, children's movies sell better than other types of movies. And our personal experience with 110 family movies is that Winky's Horse was sold 80 times. And as a rule of thumb in our industry for a feature film, if you have made 5 to 7 sales in the world for a foreign language, no cast, no budget, no marketing support movie, made with a couple of $1 million or even less, that's a good record. For a movie to be sold 80 times around the world, DVD in North America, even a movie with St. Nicola, which is the equivalent of Santa Claus in Holland, very local content, sold to broadcaster in Iran. That has a religious connotation, right? It's not because we're good, because they accept the movie. And so I think that was quite a remarkable achievement. And as Rock said, we continue to sell those movies, one run after another run. And we go to DVD and the VOD market and television and general public, general channels, and also specialized channels. If you put the whole thing together, I do believe that on average, good children's films sell better than other types of movies. Of course, other types of movies made for the general public could have a hit from time to time. But on average, if you just look at per se children's movies against the number of children's films made, And if you put the whole thing against the movies made for any other groups of other audience, children's movies perform better. And we have the database to prove that.
Thanks very much. We're going to open it now for a few questions from the audience. And I've been asked to ask you folks, if you have a question, put your hand up. We'll get you a microphone and we can get it all on tape. Anyone have a question there? Oh, over there.
Hi. Just a quick question. Have any of you ever received a pitch using a different methodology than the screenplay, the written double-space typed option? In other words, in this case, an app, original story, direct to digital, in an interactive picture book app format.
Definitely the way of the future, maybe. No? Is that what you want to do? Is that how you want to? Have you done it? You haven't? Well,
There's a company here in Toronto called Skywriter that's doing a lot of that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, but I haven't seen them. Yeah, come out of it.
How do you feel about that as an option, as an alternative to the screenplay?
Yeah. Well, we're a feature film fund, so we would always want to see the screenplay as part of the complete package for sure. Yeah. We would help you develop the screenplay, but there are other options for new media and used media content.
it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for anybody to pitch ideas. I mean, you guys seem to want to have ideas about children's films. Am I right? You would like to hear ideas. Yeah, you don't know? You got enough already?
With the point of view that we take, so with the direction that we take, we actually do put a lot of value on that pre-sold property, right? The book or something else. So while I'm always interested in original ideas, I know that our chance of success of getting a movie made is infinitely greater if there's a well-known property at the heart of it. So that makes a difference. So if you came to me and you had the Angry Bird movie and you had an app, that makes sense to me. Otherwise, it's just, it takes away from the essence. The essence isn't how you pitch it. The essence is the story, the characters, who wrote it. There's a lot of those details that are, to me, more important than how you pitch it. You can stand in front of me and say, blaga blaga, and that's as meaningful to me as somebody sending an app.
Rock, you wanted to say something?
One thing is sure, there is no lack of story. I have enough good project right now on my desk to keep me going for the next 10 years. Project that are as good as the best I have made over the last 20 years. So there is no problem there. And there is one thing I want to say. It will be probably more and more difficult to see if children films, the way we have defined it, into theaters, no matter the country. But it doesn't mean that that type of film should not be made. It's not because it's a particular beast, a children films, a film. And it could be seen through TV, bigger and bigger screen, or even to your iPhone, to DVD, to VOD. And a film is different than a TV movie. It's different than a TV program. It has a particularity that should be kept, and it doesn't matter too much if it is seen on the big screen or on smaller screens. And CBC, for me, has an absolute indispensable role to play, especially if the English part of Canada, we want to be proud and have the possibility of bringing up that type of films, no matter if they are made of original story or book, as Michael described it. CBC is essential broadcaster for those films. If CBC doesn't do it, it will be very difficult, even if everybody else is working on it without their input. I wanted to say.
Thanks, Ron. Yes, question.
It's a question for Bernie. I've seen a few of the films that have played at TIFF over the years of yours, and they've all been live action. Have you worked in animation yet? And if not, do you have plans to?
Yes. Well, in the past, animation was too expensive for us to do, and we couldn't fix it. And now, the development of computers and new technology, it's possible for us to develop animation films, and that's the we are developing now 3 films in this way, and in relation to what Xiao said, children films sell maybe better or easier to distribute in the world, and because of the competition there is not a very big competition. Yeah, there is a big competition, but we have only Disney and DreamWorks, so we have only 2 to beat. And when you develop grown-up films, you have to beat a lot more. So now is the moment when we can use the animation that we are going to beat them.
Another question? Thank you.
So I'm a screenwriter, maybe trying to be, and I'm just wondering whether, like, I'm hearing that you adapt a lot of material rather than taking original. I'm hearing that you have tons of ideas to last you for another 10 years. It's that's a little discouraging in some ways. But so for a writer who's trying to break into the industry and is passionate about telling stories for young people, how do you need writers who want to adapt? Are you still looking for those ideas, or for writers to become a part of the ideas that are still sitting on your desk?
Anyone?
Well, it would be a sad world if I were to say no. So the answer is yes, because my sort of favorite sort of saying is "long live happiness." So absolutely, young people have to be bringing in new ideas and sort of building the industry. I'm only referring to like where my company is at. When it comes to our TV shows, we do a lot of our shows are based upon original ideas. So Johnny Test, which is a very successful TV cartoon, is an original idea. We've got another 2 original ideas that are about to go in production, and so that's part of our that's part of our norm in that particular business. But when I look at movies, that is the thing that I'm looking for really is that pre-sold property, because it is such a marketing exercise when you think about opening a movie with the idea of how are you going to attract enough of an audience so that the distributor can recoup their money and you can justify the kind of production spend that you need. So it's a direction that we've taken, and again, we do use writers to adapt things, but we don't have anything anew that we're sort of looking at. We're busy doing the one project first.
We have time for one more. Or John, you want to say something?
There are a lot of Canadian production. There are a lot of Canadian production companies out there. You just have to kind of do your research. And now that they've dimmed the lights a little bit, I can see about 4 or 5 of them in this room alone. So maybe the more established companies have kind of their group of writers, but you go through the CMPA Producers Association book. There's a lot of people that are looking for material for sure. Just gotta keep at it.
But for new writers and directors, I would have one piece of advice: try something really smart, small, and that could become a hit. Nobody knew about the writer of the Blair Witch Project, and that's something we're looking for.
Maybe not for a children's film, though. Christophe, just one more question. We have one more question for anyone out there? No? Maybe I'll just ask a quick one. Can anybody? What's the most successful Canadian children's film ever? Is there such a thing? Is there one that we hold up?
Well, at least I can only speak from my experience. So in the case of Nelvana and my experience, it was the Care Bears movie, which also won a Golden Reel Award. How that did against Rock's movies, I don't know. But I think that there are a number of these movies, and generally they would have been the ones that won the Golden Reel Award. So Rock's got several. Yeah, that was a Canadian movie. That might be more. That probably was more successful than all those pictures. Well, it can be. It depends on the year, right? But today, I would say that people, if you can do $3 million at box office in Canada, you've got a big success for a Canadian movie. If you can do $2 million, you've got a decent success. But for the Golden Reel Award, it's an annual award. And are we sort of coming to the conclusion? I just wanted to say one thing, which is, as I said it in my sort of earlier remarks, I actually think this is a great time to be making, these kinds of movies in Canada. And I'm really pleased that Tiff Kids set up this panel and has, got some focus going on the kids and family area in Canada. And I think we need to all make sure that we keep working in the area and keep pushing it, because I think there's no reason why there can't be, 4 or 5, kids movies or kid/family movies that come out of this country every year. And when you hear that there was just one last year, that's kind of pathetic and sad. So onwards and outwards.
So have kids and bring them to the movies?
Then you have to do
Rock, you?
When you say the most successful Canadian films, we can answer this question from 2 different perspectives. One is the box office, the money. But the number of people that saw that film here and abroad, for instance, Back in Broccoli, which was a big success here in theaters at the time, was seen by 40 million people in ex-USSR. 3,035 millimeter print for the release. It ran for 10 years in ex-USSR, but it brought me $50,000.
So you did something wrong.
Good point.
Can I say?
Is that it, Christophe? Is there? Oh, sorry, Bernie.
Yeah, I think the situation now here in Canada is with one children's film. In Holland, we have 8, 9 a year at this moment. When 12 years ago, 13 years ago, we started with 1, 2. So when you believe in it and you tell your own stories and you're not going to imitate the American stories, but just believe in your own stories, I think it must be possible to create an audience. In Holland, we produce 12 films and we have in general 400,000 visitors a film. And our country is 2 times small, now is a half of Europe. So it must be possible to create a children's film culture in Canada. And if you can't do it yourself, you can call me.
That's up. We should do a film, the 7 Impossible Tasks of Rock de Mer. I think that'd be a good film. But thank you very much. I think this is very interesting. That's us. Thank you. Thanks so much, my guest.